South America was never supposed to become famous for fear. Not for cartels, not for narco money, not for cities where a single shipment or route could suddenly be worth killing for. And that is what makes this question so powerful. The Andes had coca long before the modern drug trade. Indigenous peoples used the leaf for medicine, ritual, and daily life for centuries. What transformed parts of the continent was not the plant itself. It was the rise of a massive illegal cocaine economy, one fueled by global demand, cartel profits, corruption, insurgency, and state weakness. UNODC distinguishes clearly between traditional coca use in the Andes and the later industrial cocaine trade that became heavily concentrated in countries like Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. So this episode is not asking what happens if South America never sees coca. It is asking what happens if it never gets trapped in the narco era. No giant cocaine boom, no parallel economy rich enough to buy generals, judges, and politicians. No illicit industry that turned violence into one of the region's most profitable businesses. How different would South America look today if that entire system had never taken hold? We do not need to erase coca. We need to stop the cocaine age. In this timeline, the global cocaine boom of the late 20th century never fully explodes. Demand in the US and Europe stays smaller. Trafficking networks never align the way they did. Coca remains mostly traditional and local instead of becoming the raw material for one of the most profitable illicit export systems on Earth. The narco era was never just crime. It was a political economy. It was a way of converting global demand into territorial power. In Colombia, drug money fed decades of guerrilla war, paramilitaries, corruption, and deep institutional strain. Britannica's history of Colombia ties narcotics trafficking directly to the growth of guerrilla warfare. And Britannica's entry on the FARC notes that the group's links to drug trafficking brought in hundreds of millions of dollars annually. In this alternate world, South America still has smugglers, corruption, inequality, and weak states in places, but it never develops a narco economy large enough to become a parallel power structure. And that bends the entire political evolution of the continent in a different direction. The first effect is not utopia. It is simply less institutional rot. Without billions in narco profits, police forces, courts, ports, and border towns are far harder to buy or intimidate. The OAS and the World Bank both describe how organized crime in Latin America undermines governance, erodes trust, weakens quality of life, and slows growth. States remain imperfect, but they are less likely to become extensions of criminal networks. Violence does not disappear, but it changes shape. South America would still have land conflicts, political unrest, illegal mining, and gang activity. Yet it would likely escape some of the uniquely self-financing, transnational violence that came with controlling cocaine routes worth millions. In our timeline, narco money turned local disputes into longer, more organized, and more profitable wars. Here, many of those conflicts likely stay smaller, less coordinated, and less capable of sustaining themselves for decades. That basic direction is consistent with the Colombian case and with the World Bank's broader argument that organized crime compounds traditional development problems and deepens insecurity across the region. This is where the timeline starts to feel genuinely different. Investors face less terror risk. Tourism likely grows earlier and more steadily. Talented people are less likely to leave purely out of fear. More regions become known for agriculture, ports, science, culture, and biodiversity, not cartel headlines. The World Bank's 2025 regional review is blunt. Organized crime and the violence around it are not just law and order problems, they are major development problems that reduce growth and weaken institutions. Without the narco economy, South America does not suddenly become rich. It simply gets more room to become normal. No drug problem does not mean no problem. Deep inequality, uneven state presence, clientelism, land concentration, commodity dependence, and traditional elite power were there long before cocaine. The narco era made many of these problems worse. It did not invent all of them. This timeline is not Scandinavia. It is South America facing its older challenges without one of the most corrosive accelerants in modern history. Take Colombia. Without the cocaine boom, rural conflict, land disputes, and insurgency risks probably still exist. But the scale, duration, and financing changed dramatically. Conflicts that once paid for themselves with illicit export capital become far harder to sustain for decades. That is exactly why the narco economy mattered so much. It did not merely accompany violence, it helped finance and prolong it. Here is the twist. The narco economy was destructive, but it was also a brutal, chaotic form of alternative capital that disrupted traditional power structures. Without it, some countries might see less violence and less corruption, but also a more stable continuity of older landed elites, commodity oligarchies, and patronage systems. The region becomes less distorted by narco power, not automatically more equal, not automatically more just. If South America had never developed a major drug problem, the continent would not become paradise. But it also would not become the South America the world learned to fear. It would likely be less violent in its most strategic corridors, less corrupted at key institutions, easier to govern, easier to invest in, and less internationally defined by cartel headlines. That broader developmental logic is consistent with the World Bank's conclusion that organized crime and violence have become a central obstacle to growth, governance, and social well-being across Latin America and the Caribbean. The drug problem did not create every weakness in the region. It acted like an accelerant, turning fragile institutions into captured ones, local violence into organized industry, and state weakness into something much harder to reverse. Without the narco age, South America would probably be less feared, less militarized in daily life, and better positioned to tackle its older problems. It would still be unequal, still politically turbulent in places, still wrestling with deep structural challenges, but it would be less hijacked, and maybe that is the real tragedy of the story. Not that South America had problems, but that one particular problem became so large, so profitable, and so violent that it helped reshape how the region grew, how it governed, and how the world learned to see it. So what do you think? If South America had never developed a major narco economy, would the continent today be more stable? Or just struggling under its older problems in quieter, less cinematic ways? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me, what if should we tackle next?